Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your reading, and welcome to Elpis, a city in the not-too-distant future where chippers can mentally Instagram their entire lives and communicate instantly through mental connections with other people. Clockatorian resistors refuse to have these chips and this technology implanted in them, but make do with the world's first truly all-purpose tool, the Proteus, which can meld and mold to whatever you think of, and the world of Zach Slade, who's trying to learn statistics in order to keep his girl. The first thing Zach has to tackle is understanding the scientific process. That is the overarching method that's used by scientists, physicists, sociologists, any number of other ists to sort fact from fiction, appearance, hypotheses, opinion, everything else. Alice's drawing on page 15 summarizes the workflow of this process. Essentially, we start by observing the world around us, generating a research question that helps us understand what we observe. The observations might be from past studies and experiments, it might be from just what we see or experience, it might be from any number of sources. At that point, instead of starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel, so to speak, every time, we seek out past research that might pertain, that we might build on, even if it doesn't answer our question precisely. Then, based on our research question and our preliminary observations, we can create hypotheses. Hypotheses of the answer to our research question. With those hypotheses, we can make predictions of observable patterns that are consistent with them. Moving from hypotheses to prediction involves something called operationalization. That is, where we identify measurable variables related to our question and our hypotheses. For the cell phone study, phone usage might be operationalized as how many hours per week someone spent talking on a cell phone, while cancer might be operationalized as the number of cancer cases diagnosed per 1,000 individuals per year. Next, now that we have hypotheses and predictions, we need data to test them. Just like when we're generating theory, we usually don't need to start from scratch. There's widespread availability of large, high-quality social science data sets like the General Social Survey, the Census, and many others. But when you're planning data, whether you're collecting your own or considering whether data will work, there are two key aspects to consider. One is the sample. Is it a quality sample? We'll talk more about that. How big is it? How representative is it of the entire population that we're interested in, and so on. The second is the measures, the survey items, medical histories, whatever those things may be that we're trying to use to operationalize our variables to test our hypotheses and our predictions. If either one of these is poor, we're only going to be able to make very tentative conclusions, no matter how strong our results appear to be. Of course, at this point, we need to analyze our data. That's most of what you'll spend time doing in this class, is thinking and talking and learning about analyzing data. That's always mixed in with the need to know about the other pieces of the process, so we won't neglect them entirely. Everything is connected to everything else and helps inform the methods you choose, the data you use, and so on. And finally, we've got our great measures, we've got our sample, we've got clear theory, we've got perfect statistical techniques to answer the questions we have with the data we have. That's not usually the case, but assume it is. And we can generalize the results to a population. We can say, yes, here's what our sample can tell us about the larger patterns within, say, the whole US population instead of the 2,000 people in a given year's General Social Survey. We always generalize with an asterisk, though, because statistics can only tell us the probability that we're wrong, as opposed to completely eliminating that probability, which it can never do. So why do we use statistics? We use statistics because without them, we either have to collect data from every single person in the target population, which is usually impossible, or we have to assume that the population is exactly like the sample on the key variables and their relationships, which is almost always a stretch. So to do this, we select a sample of individuals, ideally randomly from the overall population. We collect data, and we select instruments that are most likely to capture the true relationships and random noise or accidental spurious relationships within that data. That is, again, we sample people or units of observation, but we also sample instruments because there's any number of instruments, questions we could use that we don't. Alice next talks about two kinds of research and the differences between them. She calls the first correlational research, we'll call it observational research, which is more typical in sociology because it involves observing society or individuals without trying to manipulate their circumstances or change anything. This could be using surveys, it could be using vital records of births and deaths, Google Trends or Twitter, or even unstructured qualitative interviews. These are all observational techniques. Now, there are plenty of reasons observational research could get something wrong, and at least as many statistical methods to try and get around them, but we'll only touch on a few of them this semester. Real core methods that help you to understand everything else. By contrast, experimental researchers, which until recently were rare in sociology, intentionally manipulate a variable in the circumstances of two or more groups of cases, usually people, that have been randomly assigned to these groups. We'll talk more later about how random assignment might help to solve some of the problems of observational data. But for now, we can assume the only difference between the groups is whether they got the treatment, which manipulation they had. It could be as small as a name change on a job application. Audit studies have repeatedly tested to see whether a stereotypical white name, such as John, as opposed to a stereotypically black name, Jaquan, might affect the likelihood that people with similar qualifications get called back for interviews by potential employers. They find consistently that, in fact, minority names do decrease the likelihood of being called back. That's an experimental research design. Following assignment, researchers observe whether those outcomes, those dependent variables, are statistically different between groups. In this case, they were. Now, don't get hung up on the details in the section on practice, order, and randomization, 1.3.3. Don't worry for now. Instead, I want to focus on the big ideas in this chapter. What we can take away is an appreciation for the flow of the scientific method, an understanding of two different types of research, that is, observational research and experimental research, and their relative strengths and weaknesses, and the beginnings of a sense of the kinds of questions and data that are suited for each other. You can expect at the beginning of this next class to take a short quiz. As I've outlined, it'll ask you a couple of factual understanding questions, which shouldn't be tricky if you've read the chapter and watched this, and it'll ask you to distinguish between scientific statements and statements of opinions, values, and beliefs. You should never need to worry about studying for quizzes, except for doing the regular preparation. Hopefully their scores will never need to affect your grade. Just come to class ready to participate. Because if you, meaning all of you, don't participate regularly, not only will it make me sad, but I'll have to go back and you'll have to go back to a normal setup and do homework and get graded on that and so on. And none of us want that. So one last note. Wednesday will be our first lab. After lecture and material, we'll have about 15 minutes to walk down to Willard and get settled. That's about how long it takes, so there won't be time, unfortunately, to stop for coffee or anything like that. I wish we could have had the same classroom or building, or at least ones nearby, but unfortunately I have no control over room assignments. You don't need to prepare for lab this time, but we will use the day to start getting comfortable with the interface and design of SPSS, as well as talking a little bit more about your only assignments, so to speak. Thanks for sticking with the video to the end. If you're asked for the name of the city on the quiz, remember the name is Elpis. I'll use this so I can count how many people actually made this through. Thanks for watching. See you in class.